Something is wrong with the calendar on your wall, not metaphorically, not spiritually, not in the vague, restless way people feel when a year ends and they wonder where the time went, structurally, mathematically, demonstrably wrong, and the deeper I looked, the more I became convinced the wrongness was not accidental. Here is the most essential version of the problem. The Gregorian calendar, the one on your wall, the one in your phone, the one that governs every deadline, every birthday, every fiscal quarter of modern civilization, is chaotic, irregular, irrational at its core. Months of 28, 29, 30, and 31 days distributed in a sequence no child can memorize. Without a knuckle trick, February shrinks in most years and swells in others. The quarters don't align. The weeks don't divide cleanly into months. The months don't divide cleanly into years. Look at it closely enough, and it stops resembling a system designed for human use. It begins to look like something designed for something else. For control, perhaps. For the production of a population. Permanently slightly off rhythm. Permanently disoriented. Permanently dependent on external authority to tell them what day it is. That is a serious claim. Stay with me, because there was always an alternative. There always was a calendar system so elegant, so mathematically precise, so perfectly synchronized with natural and lunar rhythms that once you truly understand it, the Gregorian calendar doesn't just seem impractical. It seems intentionally broken. 30 months, 28 days each. 13 multiplied by 28 equals 364. Exactly 52 weeks. Exactly 4 perfect 7-day cycles every single month, every month, every year. Without exception. Add one ceremonial day outside the monthly count, a day of transition, a day of zero, a threshold day that dozens of ancient traditions specifically marked as sacred, and you have 360-5. A solar year. Perfect. Whole, repeating. The deeper I went, the more I understood this was not a fringe idea, not a theory scrawled in a notebook by someone living at the edges of credibility. This was the operating calendar of civilizations that built things we still cannot fully explain: the Maya, the ancient Egyptians, the Druids of pre-Roman Britain, the Lakota, the Yoruba. 13 months, 28 days, across separate continents, across millennia. Without documented contact, the pattern repeats with an unsettling, almost accusatory precision. Why? Here is the part that stopped me cold. You already carry the evidence of this calendar inside your own body. The human menstrual cycle averages 28 days. 13 cycles per solar year. This is not mythology. This is not symbolism. This is biology, raw and documented and ancient beyond any king's decree. It is one of the oldest clocks in nature. Older than any civilization, older than any governance structure, older than any emperor who ever decided arbitrarily how many days should belong to a month. The human body was already synchronized to this rhythm before we had language to name it, and the moon, the synodic lunar cycle, the time required for the moon to return to its same visible phase, is approximately 29.5 days. But the sidereal cycle, the moon's true orbital period measured against fixed stars, is 27.3. The 28-day month sits almost exactly between these two measurements. It is the averaging of the moon's own rhythm, as though someone looked at the sky, looked at the body, and understood these two were already speaking the same language. Let us build the calendar from that. Instead, what we have are months named after Roman emperors. July, for Julius Caesar. August, for Augustus. Months whose lengths were literally adjusted, days stripped from one month, added to another to ensure that a certain emperor's month was longer than his predecessors. This forces a simple but devastating question. When exactly did the measurement of time become a political instrument? The answer appears to be the precise moment it was taken from the natural world and handed to the state. This is where everything shifts, because what the deeper research reveals is that this was not simply lost. It was not quietly forgotten and mourned in private by those who remembered. At a specific, documentable moment in the early 20th century, people knew, scholars knew, economists knew. Reformers and philosophers knew. They knew the Gregorian calendar was inefficient, irrational, biologically misaligned, and they organized a serious, sustained, internationally coordinated effort to replace it. The International Fixed Calendar, also called the Cotsworth Plan, after Moses B. Cotsworth, a British statistician who in 1902 published a meticulous, exhaustive analysis of calendar reform. Cotsworth's proposal was a reconstruction of the ancient 13-month structure, 13 months of 28 days each. Every month identical, every quarter perfectly equal, every year beginning on the same day of the week. He named the 13th month Sol, placed between June and July, at the height of summer light. The evidence suggests something much larger was at stake than bookkeeping. Cotswo Art was not alone. George Eastman, founder of Kodak, one of the most powerful industrialists in American history, adopted the International Fixed Calendar for his company in 1928. He used it internally until 1989. He did not do this experimentally. He did it because it worked, productivity improved, administrative burden fell, the books were cleaner, the quarters were honest, the schedule made sense. Eastman became one of the most ferocious public advocates for global calendar reform, testifying before committees, lobbying governments, funding campaigns. And here is where the silence becomes deafening. The League of Nations formally took up calendar reform in the 1920s. They formed committees. They solicited proposals. Hundreds of submissions arrived from governments, businesses, religious institutions, ordinary citizens worldwide. The International Fixed Calendar was among the frontrunners. There was serious momentum, real institutional weight behind the idea, and then almost nothing. The reform stalled. The committees dissolved. The momentum evaporated. By the mid-1930s, the conversation had effectively ended. The Gregorian calendar remained. The fixed calendar was quietly shelved, not debated to defeat, not voted down in any recorded session, not dismantled by a superior argument, just buried. As though it had never been seriously considered, as though the most mathematically elegant calendar system of the modern era had simply failed to achieve traction through ordinary bureaucratic inertia. The official explanation collapses here. If you want to understand why a genuinely superior system fails to be adopted, you have to ask a different set of questions. Not why wasn't it better, it clearly was better. Even its opponents conceded that. Not why wasn't it promoted. It was aggressively promoted by some of the most influential industrialists and reformers of the era. Not even why governments didn't want efficiency. Governments routinely claim efficiency as a governing virtue. No. The question is who specifically benefits from the chaos. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Irregular months create irregular accounting. Irregular accounting requires intermediaries, accountants, administrators, clerks, entire professions whose very existence depends on the complexity of managing time. Irregular quarters make financial comparison treacherous. A month in one quarter contains 31 days, while that same month's equivalent in another calendar year contains 28. Try comparing performance across those periods with any honesty. You cannot. Not cleanly. Not without adjustment factors, conversion tables, professional interpretation. The deeper I went into the economic history of early 20th century finance, the more the resistance to calendar reform looked less like inertia and more like interest, like something actively protected by the people it protected. As though they were following instructions they didn't fully understand, or perhaps understood perfectly. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across other domains as well. Systems that synchronized human beings with natural rhythms, with the body, with the light, with the turning of seasons, have a curious, historical tendency to be replaced by systems that synchronized human beings with institutions, with clocks and quarterly reports and fiscal years that begin in January because a Roman king decided January belonged to Janus, god of doorways and transitions, centuries before the birth of modern finance. Here is what I keep returning to. The physical evidence. Consider the ancient structures aligned to the 28-day cycle, the stone circles of Britain, not just Stonehenge, The dozens of lesser-known sites are marked in ways that suggest a 28-station lunar calendar. The Aubrey holes at Stonehenge. 56 pits arranged in a precise circle. 56. 2 complete cycles of 28. Researchers have argued for decades that these pits tracked the lunar cycle in precisely the manner a 13-month calendar would require. The official archaeological literature treats this as one possible interpretation among many, but why is this interpretation not more central to everything we think we know about what Stonehenge was built for? The Maya long count calendar, the most precisely engineered timekeeping system ever constructed by a pre-industrial civilization, is built on base 20 arithmetic organized around a 20-day period called the Winel embedded within a larger structure that continuously cycles through 13 rotating numbers, 30 again, and 28 days is precisely how long it takes for the Pleiades, a star cluster considered sacred by T. The Egyptian civil calendar, 12 months of 30 days plus 5 epigomenal days, days outside the regular calendar, days considered mythologically sacred or dangerous. Sound familiar? 1 day outside the regular count to complete the solar year. The architecture of the solution is identical. Different culture, different geography, different millennium. The same underlying logic. Not coincidence, not parallel evolution by chance. Not 3 separate civilizations independently stumbling onto the same imperfect answer. The evidence suggests a shared inheritance. A common source? Something older than any of these cultures' recorded histories, embedded in the practice of tracking the sky before writing, existed to preserve the reasoning. This forces a haunting question. If this knowledge was so widespread, so persistent, so remarkably durable, what exactly happened to it, and precisely when? There is a specific and documentable pattern in the historical record of calendar transitions. When Rome imposed the Julian calendar upon the territories it conquered, it did not simply offer an alternative system. It actively suppressed local timekeeping. Druids who maintained the Celtic lunar calendar were targeted. Their traditions were criminalized. Their oral knowledge was deliberately, methodically dismantled. When the Gregorian reform replaced the Julian in 1582, entire cultures lost days, literally. The days disappeared from the legal record. Buildings were dated according to systems that had ceased to exist. People went to sleep in 1 month and woke inside another. The scholar Moshe Idel and others in the field of ethnostronomy have documented that the suppression of indigenous calendar systems was almost never framed as what it actually was, a political act. It was always presented as correction, as modernization. The replacement of superstition with science, of the body and the moon with the clock and the state. And here is the part that disturbs me most. The people who executed these transitions, the administrators, the scribes, the priests who adopted and enforced the new dating systems, in most documented cases, they appear to have understood neither the full logic of the system they were abandoning, nor the full implications of the system they were imposing. As though they were following instructions they couldn't fully decipher. As though the decision had been made elsewhere, at a level they could not access, and their role was only execution. The silence in the archival record around the 1920s. Calendar reform debates is of a very particular kind. Key correspondence from the League of Nations Committee is incomplete. There are references to documents that do not appear in the official archive. Meeting minutes that summarize discussions without recording their substance. The Cotsworth Papers, housed at the University of Toronto, contain significant gaps precisely around the years of peak lobbying, when the debate came closest to resolution, not water damage, not cataloging errors, not ordinary institutional entropy. Gaps that cluster with unsettling regularity around the most consequential moments. I want to stop here and ask something almost never asked in the context of calendar history. What would it have felt like to live in a world where every month was the same length? Where the first of every month always fell on the same day of the week? Where you always knew, without reaching for a device, without the low-level anxiety of checking exactly where you were in the cycle, where the rhythm of your work, Your rest, your commerce, your ceremony, all of it moved in lockstep with the rhythm of the moon overhead. And, as some researchers argue, with the rhythm of the body itself. I am not making a mystical claim. I am asking a practical one. What does it do to a human nervous system to live for generations inside chronological irregularity? To never quite know instinctively, bodily, viscerally, where you stand in the year? To experience time as something imposed from outside rather than something rising from within? There is emerging research in chronobiology, the science of biological time, suggesting that human health, cognitive clarity, and emotional regulation are profoundly shaped by alignment or misalignment with natural cycles. The field is young. The implications remain largely unexplored, but the question it opens is one I cannot close. What if the calendar reform was never just about administrative efficiency? What if something far larger and far older was being argued for and against in those committee rooms? Think about what it means to know time the way you know hunger. Not to calculate it, to feel it. The way animals feel the season turning before a single leaf has fallen. There are indigenous communities that maintain the 28-day count into the modern era. Ethnographies who lived among them recorded something they struggled to name. A fundamentally different relationship to urgency, to waiting, to the present moment. As if time were something you inhabited. Not something pursuing you from behind. We called that primitivism. What if we had it completely backwards? George Eastman died in 1932. His company abandoned the International Fixed Calendar in 1989 after 61 years of continuous internal use. No announcement, no official explanation. Just a quiet transition back to the Gregorian system, as though 61 years of evidence had ceased to matter. The World Calendar Association still exists. The 13-moon calendar movement, inspired in part by the research of José Argüelles, continues advocating for a return to the 28-day cycle. These movements are small, marginal, unfunded by institutions, untaught in schools. The deeper I went, the more the shape of the thing became visible, not as a single conspiracy with a single architect, not as a coordinated plot hatched in a single room, but as a pattern, a recurring, cross-cultural, multi-century pattern of suppression, replacement, and forgetting. A pattern of taking something that synchronized human beings with the natural world and replacing it, methodically, with something that synchronized human beings with human institutions instead. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I am not telling you the Gregorian calendar is evil. I am not telling you the 13-month calendar is magic. I am asking why a system that was mathematically superior, biologically resonant, historically documented across dozens of independent civilizations, and actively championed by serious institutional reformers as recently as 90 years ago, why that system now sits buried at the outermost margins of history while a calendar constructed around the vanity of Roman emperors governs every single life on earth. I am asking what we lost when we lost the rhythm. I am asking whether the word lost is even accurate, or whether taken is closer to what the evidence actually suggests. I am asking why the deepest silences in the archival record always seem to cluster around the moments of replacement, around the transitions, around the precise points where one way of measuring time ended and another began without announcement, without warning, without record. And I am asking the oldest version of the question, the one underneath all the others. What did we once know about time? About the body, about the sky above us, that we no longer know we have forgotten? Maybe that is the most devastating realization of all. Not that the knowledge was destroyed. Destruction leaves evidence. Destruction leaves ash? It leaves the memory of fire, the scar of something burned, but this knowledge was displaced, quietly, incrementally, replaced with something just functional enough that nobody screamed. Just workable enough that the loss went unnoticed for generations. Then centuries. We never mourned the 13 months because we were never told they existed. We never missed the rhythm because we were born already out of step, handed a broken clock, told it was the only clock there ever was. Raised never to question it. What else have we been handed and never once thought to question?